Hello, I'm Amy, and welcome to Not Another Education Podcast, the podcast where we can't promise you that you will learn anything at all, but if you like great stories, great guests, and awesome chat, then you are in the right place. Today, we are talking all things sex education. Here's Ingrid to play us in.
We may wander off on a tangent or two, and I hope you're all ears, cause we may talk off a few. But other than that, take a load off, relax. The fun has begun, we're not just another education podcast.
I think it comes down to personal experience as well, because, if we've got we'll touch on it in a minute, but I guess so many benefits of having open conversations with the people who are closest to you, and even people who are in your care. If you're like an educator in any way, and you're looking to talk about complex kind of sex and relationship topics, being open about that, there are so many benefits. But I almost wonder, because nobody, when I was growing up, and I mean, I guess when I started kind of menstruation and stuff, nobody had really talked to me about it. So it was I thought I was dying. I honestly did. I thought
You would if you'd not been prepped, what on earth is happening to my body? That's going to be
yeah.
scary for any young person. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know from kind of teaching year six that and especially in the kind of schools that I taught in, that were Catholic or heavy faith schools, and even back then I don't think it was like a talk, wasn't it, in terms of sex education, that you left the last, or at least the later years of primary school. But there was
Always,
some young girls in year four even starting their periods and have no idea what's going on, really frightened. And it is a really confusing time. And I don't know if this is the same because everyone's body's different, but mine kind of went away in a couple of days. And I was like, oh, that's sorted. I don't need to tell anyone about it. And then
exactly. Yeah. And I think that absolutely is a personal anecdote, and you are, sorry to say, you're not unique because there will be so many globally, so many girls who have, and boys actually, or anyone whose body isn't doing what they assume is the norm, or their body's doing something that they haven't been prepped for the fact that it is going to do or might do. And our bodies are all different, and we'll do things at different times. And okay, we wouldn't necessarily have a whole lesson about every individual thing that a human body might do. But what we can do from really, really, really early on is tell children that it's okay to ask questions about things that you're unsure of, whether it's your mental health, your physical health, your general well-being, your feelings of safety. And if we can get those messages across from really early on, then rather than addressing everything as a whole class, which certainly we do need to do when it comes to aspects of health education and changes and growing up and puberty, and we do need to teach children specifically about those things. But even before we teach about those, if we can make sure children know who their trusted adult is at home, who their trusted adult is at school, and that it's okay to ask questions if you feel unsafe, if you feel worried, if you're confused, if you are experiencing emotions that you don't know how to deal with, if your body's doing something that you weren't expecting it to do. And yeah, if we could open up those discussions from early on, children might feel more inclined. That child who does start puberty early and the class haven't had the whole class lesson on it, but the child who starts early would maybe think, oh, okay, we haven't learnt about this, and perhaps no one, I haven't got anyone at home I can really talk to about, but I do feel safe to go and approach my teacher, or my teaching assistant, or the teacher who I do school council with because they're really nice, or whatever it might be. If they feel they've got someone that that then they could not feel on their own and isolated and frightened and scared. And, as adults, I think we would then think, we can all recognise that we'd rather a child didn't either suffer in silence and not know what's going on about something, um, or that they got the right information. And I think that's certainly when it comes to relationships and sex education, children getting the right information is so important, because there's a lot of misinformation out there, and it's more easy to access than it ever has been because of the internet. When I was young, it was magazines, maybe you'd get hands on a sort of a teenage girls magazine when you were still only 11, 12, and that would be really exciting and funny if it had this month's sex position.
I know. I remember this too. I remember like my sister having certain magazines. I won't name them because I don't know if they still exist, and I don't want Twinkl to get in trouble. But I remember like seeing something like what's the best sex position, and it was like you do like a flowchart kind of quiz.
Yeah, answer the question.
And then it was like, this is what type of sexual partner you are, this is what position you like. And I didn't know what that meant when I was like 14, no idea.
No, so it may have gone over our heads, and that's fine, because we do have to also, as adults, remember that children will process the information they're ready to process, and a lot of it will go over their heads if they're not yet ready. So that's fine. But of course, for those who are ready, and again, we're all different, so children will have different experiences of their own. Sadly, sometimes it's that they've been exposed to something they shouldn't have been from a younger age, and children will develop and mature at different ages and be able to understand things at different ages. But at least, I guess what I was going to say about the magazines is that, apart from the fun quizzes, and some of it obviously was very flippant and kind of silly, but actually, if there was any information given, it probably was accurate information. So, at least if that's what we accessed, or I don't know, if you did manage to get your hands on a book, it probably did have accurate information, even if it was either a bit scientific and biological or maybe a little bit outdated. But of course, the information that can float around online now, a lot of that really isn't accurate. And that's probably what kids will turn to, because obviously it's easier to access it. You can do it in private. You don't have to be embarrassed to ask a question. Type it into Google and no one's going to make fun of you. So yeah, things definitely have changed, and we do need to address that with our curriculum, which, thank goodness, in my opinion, the statutory relationships and health education curriculum is going a long way to address that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think like a lot of people will be thinking kind of, I completely resonate with that about you sort of saying they'll like, young people will process it when they're ready to process it. Like they'll read it, they'll see the words, but ultimately like the meaning behind what that is, when they're ready, they'll, the information will kind of resonate. But I think like a lot of challenges that are facing like people at home with children, people in school, right across the board, anyone who's involved in any type of education with young people, is like, how early is too early, or how late is too late to start talking about the changes. Because I know when I used to teach in school, is that we would have I mean that this is a number of years ago now, so it's not recent whatsoever, but a number of years ago, if you were in year 3, you'd have essentially a talk about what keeping your bodies clean, or what might happen to your body in the next few years. And then when they get to year 6, we would talk about menstruation and erections and wet dreams and pubic hair and all these different things that they may be starting to experience. But I think that's a lot of debate around the delivery And the coverage is how late is too late, how early is too early, I guess.
Yeah, I totally hear that. And, when you read around, you look at the research that's been done, of course, you can find different research to prove different things, and it'll be a subjective topic like pretty much everything. We've all got our own personal views, which again come from our own experiences, our culture, our faith, our religion, our upbringing, and that's absolutely fine. But of course, the government have to make a decision about the curriculum, and we have to kind of think about what works best for most children, and we do then base that is based on research. And I think, you to an extent, you look at what needs to be covered in different themes. So the phrase sex education, of course, gets kind of used a lot. But when it comes to primary school, we've got to remember that actually that's relationships and sex education. And the relationships bit comes first. That's first and foremost. So really, with very young children, the more important themes that you're building early on are literally, who's in my family, what makes a good friend. But then you're also going to be looking at what's okay and not okay. What is, sort of, it's okay to cuddle someone if they want to be cuddled, but it's not if they don't want to be. So you're looking at really early aspects of consent and autonomy, which later on feeds into sex education, and it's a big reason as to why the Sex Education Forum, for example, and organisations who really are pushing for good quality sex education in schools. This is a big reason why we need it, because it's so closely linked to safeguarding children. And actually,
because is it like a relationship with your body first and foremost, and your boundaries? Like, is that kind of I think that's
There's so much around it, but that's self-respect and respecting others' boundaries, which again, can literally be personal space, or no, I don't want to hold hands. But of course, as you get older, it is linked to more intimate relationships and what people do and don't want to do, and what people feel comfortable doing. And of course, it's now, again, coming back to the internet, in the digital age, it's those digital boundaries. It's not okay to ask someone to send a naked picture of themselves and either blackmail them or tell them it's what everyone's doing, or however you persuade that person to do that. And if we don't, again, the research is there. Children are being asked to do that from quite a young age, sometimes by older people, but sometimes by peers, sometimes by people their own age. And if you don't prep kids a bit, then they won't be ready for that.
There is and that's so important. And I think it's something that, we like to think in terms of the world of primary, especially primary, I think, is that these children don't have any exposure to this, kind of world, and they do. So that, my opinion of it is that the best way is to lay the information out on the table, because I've been faced with that. Obviously can't go into the details, but I've been faced with a safeguarding issue in a previous school because a child was not educated on the importance of boundaries. And it was a revelation for them, because they were not told that, like you say, if you don't want to cuddle, you shouldn't have to do that. You can say no, and it means no.
So it doesn't have to be about sexualizing children, and that is a common concern, sadly often perpetuated by the media or certain online groups who have a big voice. This notion of sex education equals you're sexualizing my child too soon. But actually, I think, if parents knew what the curriculum involves, and that's why definitely school and home working together is always going to be best. There's research that shows the best relationships in sex education happens when you've got schools and parents working together. And the research shows that, children it's not about sexualizing them. It's about high quality education. And if parents know the resources that will be used, the vocabulary that will be used, the way it will be delivered, and if the parents have confidence in the school, actually they'll be reassured rather than alarmed in any way. They'll think, oh, good. And that dialogue with parents, where actually perhaps as teachers we make the assumption that the parents are going to react negatively towards their child being taught sex education that's age appropriate. But have we asked the parents? And if we surveyed the parents in one particular setting where the teachers may have been saying, oh, the parents, might not want us to teach this. But actually, if you surveyed them, you might find that, 98% of the parents absolutely do want their child to receive high quality sex education at home. And they'd probably like some support at home with how to talk to their children about it as well, because they probably don't feel confident or comfortable. So the school could support with sending home some leaflets or some links to good websites that are trustworthy, where parents and children together can discuss things. Or, one thing we've developed at Twinkl Life is a kind of answering difficult questions, and kind of be a little bit prepared. Obviously, you can never be fully prepared, and as a teacher or a parent, at some point you're going to get a question that catches you off guard.
Yeah, I've had some of those.
But then it's absolutely, I bet we've all got stories we could air. If I'm able, I could share one of my favourites, which was from year 5.
Yeah, I would love that, Faye.
Year 5 sex education, and we had split the boys and the girls up, which again, best practice now is that if you can, as much as possible, teach the whole class about puberty and the changes that both sexes will go through. That's more inclusive. But I understand that often it's quite good to then let the girls or the females have a space where they can talk more about menstruation and ask questions and not feel uncomfortable. So that's best practice as well. But we had at the time split the girls and the boys. So I just had the girls at that time. And one of the questions came up, and it was, why are there different flavour condoms? And, as a teacher, we all dread that moment. I hadn't prepped for that particular question.
It's a good question.
It's a great question, which is probably the first thing I said in response. Well, you're trying to buy yourself some time, aren't you, as a teacher? And you're like, that's a good question, and you're rapid. You can hear the cogs turning.
There's probably some adults that also wonder this, myself included.
yeah. And the thing is, for whatever reason, that child that asked it may have seen them in their home. That's fine. They may have seen them on the shelves in Boots. They may have seen them in a condom machine in a public toilet. Who knows? And again, it doesn't mean that child was asking something inappropriate, because generally children ask questions when they're curious about something. Okay, obviously with year 5s, I didn't want to go into a conversation about oral sex or discuss anything more really about flavours of condoms. But I think at the time I said something like, well, it's more than anything, it's probably to disguise the smell of the rubber, just so they smell a bit nicer. And I think we kind of moved on from there, and that was fine. And that answer probably sufficed for that child. They probably thought no more about it, or they may have gone home and asked their parents about it. And obviously we can't give out advice on every single topic that might come up. But I think what probably struck me more than anything was that in that safe space, that child felt able to ask that question. I did come up with an answer, but I could have said, I'm not sure, I'll look into that for you. Or that's something that you'll probably find out when you're older, which is sometimes the answer we give kids. Generally, I don't think they like those sorts of answers. They've asked the question and they want some kind of response. Usually, I think you'll find that trying to just keep telling them, oh, you'll learn that when you're ready. I think that's probably, I think most kids know they're being fobbed off. So, I Ideally, I think if we can give them an answer, and usually that answer when it comes to sex education is quite a biological scientific one, and that's okay. Certainly if they're learning about the topic of, actually human reproduction, you might have children in your class who've grown up on a farm, or their parents are in the business of breeding puppies. They're probably going to know quite a bit about reproduction in that sense, from a sort of an animal sense. And human reproduction doesn't need to be so different from the fact that all animals, including humans, reproduce. And of course, that's actually part of our science curriculum. So I think for me personally, and I know when you and I chatted previously, we talked about the fact that, and you've just hit on it earlier today, that thing of sex education in primary tends to be one lesson, maybe two, at the end of year 6, that summer term, often left to as late in the summer term as possible, because it's been put off, or maybe teachers are hoping to not get any comeback from parents or from children themselves. I don't know.
Maybe. I just saw it as my TA used to say no sex ed before SATs.
Oh yeah, I guess there's that. And that fits. For some schools, it might be that they're keeping in mind a residential trip, and it really is important to have talked to girls about menstrual well-being before they go on a residential trip, because of course if they are away when they start their period, that would be quite a scary experience, not being at home and and having their family around them. So lots of schools try to make sure they've timed it there, and that's great. That's good practice, definitely. But I think the thing is if we leave it to that one lesson, which I know in one of the schools I worked in actually kind of became referred to as the talk, and it just becomes this taboo, exciting, scary, nerve-wracking, all these things that just mean it's really, really different from any other area of the curriculum. We don't build anything else up like that, and we're going to be doing fractions.
I wish there was that much excitement about fractions.
Exactly. I probably did face the fractions with more dread than I did the sex ed as a teacher. I'll be honest. But no, I think we have a lot to answer for as parents, as educators, as people in society, for making the subject as taboo as it is. And if a really good quality PSHE spiral curriculum addresses topics like growing up, ourselves, our bodies, health, changes, if it tackles those issues, or not issues, those topics from early on, and keeps revisiting them at really age appropriate levels, then what you end up with ideally is children who in Key Stage 1 have learnt the names of the parts of the body, including genitalia. And that means the proper names. And you could, in your lesson, discuss the different names that children use. And that's fine. And explain to them, all these different words you use, from willy to I don't know, whatever else it might be, mini, lots of different sort of pet words or slang words that people
we
use.
used to, maybe my son, when he's far older, will hate me saying this, but we used to say widgie. And now it's Willy. He knows it's called a penis though, because we went to London to visit his cousins, which are twin girls, and they got a bath together, and he was like, they don't have one. And I was like, no, they don't have a penis. And then my sister kind of took over to tell her children why they don't have a penis.
Exactly. And any kids with siblings or cousins, or even who've seen their own parent in the bath or the shower, or children are going to visually be aware of bodies and differences in males and females. So yeah, and I think why it's fine that we have these nicknames, but also, do we do that for any other body parts?
No, do you know,
Not really.
do you know honestly why I call it that? This is, again, very, very maybe shameful for him when he's older. It's because it's quite sweet, isn't it? He's a little baby at the end of the day. He's now a toddler, but I don't think it's because I don't want him going around saying, like, my penis this and my penis that. Like, I'm not really not bothered what he says, to be honest. I try to be as free and open with Charlie as possible. And I think, like, he'll see me getting dressed and he'll see, like, my C-section scar, and he'll see my little pouch, and he'll ask what it is. And, if he sees my husband, kind of getting out the shower, he'll ask questions about it. And, we I think we try our best. And I think, kind of touching on what you sort of said earlier about, I guess, people understanding their bodies and having a good relationship with their bodies, is like, my dream would be for like my son to, I guess, maybe grow up with an understanding of his body and how other people's bodies are also different, and the complexities that come with that. And I think that, definitely the generation that I grew up in, it was very much pushed on you that you learned sex and relationships from content that was sexual, like American Pie, those films, and some children even accessing pornography online. And I'd like to think that he's kind of looking at me, as a female, and thinking, her body is different to that female, or that person who identifies as male or female. And I think that it's I just want him to have a healthy appreciation and understanding for the human body. And I think that's such an I'm not sure, like, do they work anything like that into the curriculum? Because I know there's been some changes, hasn't there? But do they talk anything about that? Or
well, I know, again, it depends, whether you're literally just following the government guidance to the letter when it comes to those objectives, and they're not broken down as much as I think teachers would like them to be. Excuse me. And they are kind of, by the end of Key Stage 2, children will be able to. So again, in theory, schools could do a little bit at the end of Year 6 and say, yep, we've done that by the end of Key Stage 2, because it's not broken down into Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. However, most schools know that best practice is going to be to follow, say, the PSHE Association objectives, and they're broken down much, much more into Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2 and beyond. And certainly in some of our lessons that we've created for PSHE, we've done relationships before you start to look at, and what is a sexual relationship and who can have one? What does the law say? What's important?
Such a good point. Like, talking about, like, the difference between, like, relationship and a sexual relationship, like, coming back to those boundaries. Like, am I right in thinking they should be viewed, like, differently, right?
Yeah. I mean, children can learn from quite a young age that they have relationships with people in their family. They have relationships with their friends. They have a relationship with people at a club they go to. Those are all types of relationships. And within those relationships, you can have healthy and unhealthy relationships. So a toxic sort of friendship where your friend keeps blackmailing you to give them your new stuff or your lunch money or whatever it might be, that's still an example of an unhealthy relationship, which again is really setting good themes for children growing up about self-respect, respecting others, boundaries, consent, autonomy, what's okay, what's not okay. If something is making you feel uncomfortable, then you can stop it or speak to someone or ask for help. So those are those kind of underlying, those themes that underpin what comes next. And then coming back to certainly things like body image. Again, we've addressed that in one of our Year 6 lessons, and I know it's tied into a lot of content when it comes to online learning, because again, sadly, lots of those images are being shared online, and secondary schools are addressing things like unrealistic expectations that young people take from watching pornography, that, whether that is how they think a body should look, or how they think sexual performance looks, or what they think is expected of a male and a female in when they're involved in sexual intercourse. Issues of power can come into it, again, consent, and actually, if we don't address those issues through good quality sex education, then we do, sadly, and again, the research shows it, the data shows it, the stats show it, we sadly end up with perhaps young people getting involved in sexual relationships earlier than they might have, or being involved in unhappy relationships, whether they're sexual or not, but thinking that they don't really have a say, or that's the norm, or that's what's expected. I can't really clearly remember exactly what it was, but a long time ago, I went on a training course, probably led by the Sex Education Forum, or it might have even been led by kind of the NHS in partnership with education, about sex ed, in my role as a PSHE lead. And they were giving us some stats, some data. They were making it really relevant to the area where I taught. And they'd looked at things like teenage pregnancy stats and compared it with different locations, but also some other like European locations. But as well as the kind of quantitative research and the number crunching and the data and stats, they'd also got qualitative research as part of what they'd been doing. And there was one kind of example cited, and it was where they'd interviewed teenage couples who were sexually active about sexual behaviours. And I can't remember exactly which European country it was. I feel like it was one of the Scandinavian countries, or it might have been Holland or Sweden or Denmark or somewhere. And they'd got that, and they'd also kind of worked with teenagers in Britain, and there was this comparison being drawn in this particular study. And they'd asked teenage boys about why they had had sex with their partner, and the kind of more common answer from the European country that was being kind of contrasted with Britain was answers like, because I love her, or because we're in love, or because we're in a committed relationship. And the answers that were coming through from this particular study, from the young British males that were surveyed, were answers like, because I can, because I want to, because she let me.
That is just shocking, right?
And at the time, like everyone in the room, I was shocked. And yet I could relate to it, as well as when I kind of thought back to my teenage self, and perhaps how there was that subliminal notion of sex being slightly separate from a loving relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is really sad, actually. Now, my sex education was end of year 6, learn about periods. And then I vaguely remember something about putting condoms on, well, I want to say bananas. I don't think it was bananas. And I know that's a kind of the stereotypical joke about sex ed is putting condoms on bananas. But if it wasn't bananas, I don't know what it was. But it was learning how to put a condom on. And okay, yeah, we did that. But it was like one lesson. and it was probably hilariously funny and giggly because there hadn't been any previous lessons where you've normalized it or usualized it a little bit. Certainly there was nothing in those days about inclusive sex ed. So whether that's for people who identify as non-binary or trans, or gays, lesbians, people with disability, that just wasn't mentioned at all. You say, where those people were supposed to get their sex education from, I have no idea, because that you weren't catered for.
Yeah, and I think that just adds to the whole non-normalization of it, because there'll be, I mean, even now, in 2021, there'll be children, young people up and down the country sitting there thinking, well, does this apply to me? Is this, and we this episode was born out of the Netflix series Sex Education, and we talked about it, didn't we? We
amazing.
love that.
Love it. Wish all teenagers. I don't know. I don't get to call what age, but you're legally allowed to have sex at 16. So couldn't all teenagers age 15 just learn a lot more about it before they're legally allowed to have sex?
Yeah, absolutely. And in the most recent series, there's an episode where they're right, we're having the talk. They actually call it the talk, I think. And they're right, well, in this line boys, and in this line girls, and you're going to go to your respective talks. And then there's a couple of students who identify as non-binary, and the school gives a perfect example of exactly what not to do, and just basically say, which parts do you have? Go to that room. You have these parts, so go to that room. And then when they're actually in the room, it's a conversation about, this is what's going to happen. And the girls, and I mean, it is obviously exaggerated because it's an entertainment series. It's not,
of course, of course. No, it's not actually used for education purposes, but it cleverly, as you said, it highlights the issues, but how powerful that they are raising those issues and getting anyone who watches it to empathize with what that must be like for someone who doesn't identify as the majority of people identify.
And you know what? One thing that they talk about in that particular episode that I actually thought, do you know what? I mean, again, it is an exaggeration because the girls essentially, and people who were identifying as girls in this room, were having this talk from somebody who had experienced a very, very early pregnancy in their life, so late teenage. Kind of those late teenage years. They didn't really specify, but they were kind of saying how it ruined your life and you shouldn't do it, and don't have sex, abstinence, and all this sort of thing. And somebody said, well, what about sex for pleasure? And somebody else said, you're just advocating abstinence, and the research shows, and they actually said this in the show, this isn't me, they said that the research shows that teaching abstinence does the exact opposite, in the sense that it doesn't stop young people from becoming sexually active. If anything, people just rebel against it, and with a lot of misinformation and knowledge is power in this situation. And if there's young people going out and not understanding safe sex, then that's terrible. That's such a disservice to our young people, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, on the Sex Education Forum, you can find lots of info. And again, they will say that research does show that good quality sex education leads to those children that have had that good quality sex education are more likely to use contraception than those who've had no sex education at all. You can't just ignore something and assume it won't happen, which, yes, we don't want our children learning about things they're not ready for, or trying things they're not yet old enough to try. And that could be smoking or drinking alcohol. There are lots of things we don't want our child to get behind the wheel of a car and start trying to drive before they're legally allowed to and have had the right lessons. So yeah, we do need to pitch it right, and that's why experts will produce high quality resources. And it's also why a big need that I think all educators would agree, whether they're people who are in the front line as teachers, whether it's people who are writing resources for teachers, or whether it's people in education, in the government, that kind of thing. But I think we'd all agree that the staff training, the training for teachers is so important, because once teachers do feel confident and empowered and really sure of the curriculum and what to deliver when and how to answer any particular tricky questions they might be faced with, even if that answer is, I'm not sure, I'll find out, or could we come back to that another time? If teachers just had that training so they felt more confident, I think that would make a huge impact, definitely. There will always be different schools of thought, of course there will, as to what's absolutely age appropriate, and I guess like we've said, there isn't a hard and fast answer to that anyway. One girl might start her period age 8 and another girl might not start her period till age 15, so you can't just teach it to the year 3s or year 4s and then not come back to it, because you've only maybe made it relevant to a couple of early starters, and you can't leave it till lots of children have already been through changes and not understood what's happening with their body. So again, it's that kind of key phrase, spiral curriculum. This is a topic, like all the other topics in PSHE, that you need to keep revisiting so that the language becomes more familiar and everyone's more comfortable using it, and so that the concepts become more familiar and the children can build on the little understanding they've started with each year. They can build on that a bit more, and then by the time you have got to year 5 or year 6 and beyond into secondary, children are more likely to ask more sensible questions. They're perhaps more able to maturely articulate their questions or their thoughts or their concerns. They're probably more able to empathise with one another and have a little bit more of an understanding of what other people are going through. And they'd be more accepting of those who are quite different when it comes from the way they identify in terms of their gender, or someone who has a different sexual orientation.
Yeah.
I mean, we even in our year 6 lessons, we mention the term asexual and what that means, because you're just trying to create awareness. You're not saying this is how to do it, or this is forbidden, or this is the way you go about it. It's just very much about kind of awareness, facts, safe environments in which you can ask questions, acceptance that we're all different, respect for differences, all those kind of core themes.
Can I as well pick up on the kind of gender assignment, or any kind of bisexual or homosexual feelings that young people might be kind of then considering at this point, when they're trying to make a relatable connection between the curriculum currently and then obviously the teacher just trying to do their absolute best to deliver what's accurate and what's appropriate in within the remits of the school. And then let's say somebody in a particular class asks a question or approaches something that is quite I guess difficult to answer if you don't, or if you're not sure of the experience that person is having. And when we kind of spoke, like a little while ago now, I think like a lot of the diversity in the content comes from really like knowing about what people go through in terms of the
Mm,
process behind finding yourself and finding what sexual kind of orientation you are and your sexual
mm,
preferences. And it
mm,
comes back to that relationship with your own body. And
mm, mm,
I wonder kind of how diverse the content in schools is and how comfortable maybe parents or home educators feel
mm,
in
mm,
answering those big questions that
mm, mm.
you know where I was
Yeah.
never asked anything like that when I did sex ed, and it's coming back to
No,
normalizing
which
it, isn't it? So
I was going to say, you could kind of argue that perhaps in the past, any child in the room who either themselves had a question because of the way they were feeling, or actually because their uncle has just got a new boyfriend. So let's remember this: that sex education isn't just about the sex that the children are going to have when they're older. It's about learning about relationships in the world around
yeah,
them, and that this is real life. You will meet people, so someone in your class that you're teaching may have two mums or two dads, or have someone in their family who identifies as transgender or non-binary, or so you will have that, different experiences, different questions. I guess there's an element, as a teacher, there's an element of which questions do you want to take kind of in that open forum and discuss as a whole class, or which questions do you want to come back to and have a conversation with just that individual because it's appropriate for them, and not necessarily appropriate for everyone else, and that's okay to do that. You might have a child, you're learning about human reproduction in year 4, and you might have a child that's sort of, well, you very likely might have a child who is adopted and knows they're adopted, or a child who is aware that they weren't conceived, that there was sort of medical intervention used for them to be conceived. Um, and actually, that's being brought into the curriculum more as well when it comes to the human reproduction bit, so that we are making sure that we're being as inclusive as possible of the fact that, families can all look different, and types of birth can vary, and types of conception can vary. And sometimes science intervention is needed. And I guess, like anything, if we're open and we talk about it from a point of some knowledge and understanding, great if you've got it from a personal point of view, but of course we won't all have that. So again, as educators, perhaps we do need to make sure we feel a bit more knowledgeable, because then we can answer those questions with more confidence and with more accuracy. So yeah, I think that's something, as you say, it wouldn't have probably come up in the past, but it's definitely coming up more now in the curriculum. And sadly, the government guidance has been quite vague when it comes to the LGBTQ plus side of things, and they've kind of it's a bit of an old get out clause where they've kind of put schools are to determine what LGBTQ plus content they include and how they cover it, which of course leaves schools and educators feeling confused as to what
yeah.
they should be covering.
And not very empowering either, because I mean, in all
Exactly.
honesty, as much as I feel like I know about that, like talking to children who are potentially part of that community or consider
Yeah.
themselves in that community, I would not know how to answer
No.
those questions, and what
No.
objectives I feel is kind of like right to cover,
Yeah.
and that's not fair. That's not fair to
Yeah.
put it back on teachers, I don't think.
Exactly. Exactly. But again, I guess what I would say, and from the content we've written in Twinkl Life, I think again it's about that early understanding for children that people are all different and families are all different. So, and even there's that lovely book on Twinkl originals called Part of the
Yeah, I
Party.
saw that. It's
And
great, isn't it?
yeah, and it's gorgeous, and it's absolutely aimed at Key Stage 1. And the point of the story is kind of, that families are all different, but with this kind of subplot of there being a party that it's originally going to be I think it's is it mums and it's dads and daughters disco or something, I think, and the main character has two dads, and it's which one shall I take?
Oh,
And then as she starts talking to her
yeah.
friends, one of her friends is like, well, I've only got my grandma, so that means I can't come to the party. And someone else is, well, I live with two mums. I haven't got a dad, so I can't come to the party. And so, and through the book, you explore all the different families, which, let's be honest, in diverse Britain, in your class, you will have lots of different families. So it's creating that awareness from really early on, because then when sex education does become more about helping children understand sexual relationships with that other special someone, and they're learning about this further up in secondary school, there should be that safe space for children to ask, well, what about a same-sex relationship, or to feel okay to say, I haven't really experienced any sexual feelings yet, and to feel confident that that's okay, and there isn't this peer pressure of everyone's doing it, or it's not quite the same. But my daughter, who's 12, so she's in year 8, last year when she was in year 7, she came home, and she'd only been at school like 2-3 months. It's an all girls school, and she said, there's loads of lesbians and bisexual people in my class. And I said, oh, okay, yeah. She said, yeah, everyone's sort of been talking about it. But, there's also people who really fancy Draco Malfoy, and they're all obsessed with him. She said, but I don't really know what I identify as. And I said, yeah, that's fine. She said, yeah, and I just said that, and it clearly was okay. They'd had an open discussion. These 11 and 12-year-old girls, they're all getting to know each other because they're in a new school and they'd been together for a couple of months. But they were clearly quite openly just talking about, well, I'm attracted to this actor, or, oh, well, I like him, but I also like her, so I think I'm bisexual. And someone else saying, oh, well, I'm definitely lesbian. And Lyra felt able to say, oh, well, I'm not sure yet. I don't know. I haven't decided. And it was all okay.
But the bravery around that, like, because if I'm thinking about myself as like 11 and 12, I mean, I didn't even kind of consider that, because, people didn't really talk about it so openly,
No,
which is so
no.
wonderful, like, to kind of consider and see, like, diversity, because it's
Yeah.
everywhere. And, the more we talk about it, I have a friend, and she's kind of saying, I don't understand why they call gay sex, for lack of a better word. Like, it's just sex.
It's sex.
It's just sex. Like,
and sex doesn't have to be sexual intercourse. Sexual activity, of course, covers loads of different things. And again, are we really helping children to understand that having a sexual relationship with a partner is what is right for those two people who are consenting to that relationship and touching each other or doing whatever it is they want to do that feels right for both those people? And we still seem to be sort of hung up on how to teach it from a really biological point of view.
Yeah, because like, I think people feel safe with science, and really, like, people are so much more complex and multifaceted than biologically speaking. And I think that, again, going back to sex education, there's a lesbian relationship in there, and they're kind of like, we didn't actually know how to have sex, because
Yeah.
in no point, like, I mean, I was taught, even myself in school, sex is between a man and a woman,
Yeah.
the penis entering a vagina,
And that's
and
that's what
that's
intercourse
sex.
is, and you do it to make a baby.
Yeah,
Yeah,
There's no pleasure, there's no
no,
relationships, there's
no.
so
No,
these
we're not going
people
to
who
teach
are,
about foreplay or
no.
or oral sex or anything that's exactly. Yeah, it's a shame.
And I think, like, your daughter kind of openly speaking about it is so powerful, because in a lot of ways, it's like these two girls on sex education, they're like trying to figure out what they like
Yeah,
as a sexual relationship,
yeah.
because they're ready, and they're consenting, and they
And
feel in
they
a committed
they
relationship.
feel affectionate towards one another, and have sexual feelings, which again, we can't just pretend that doesn't happen. People who experience sexual arousal, and again, it will start at different ages for different people. Um, you it's it, why would we just say ignore that? Sadly, it feels like perhaps in British culture we say ignore that to a lot of things, because it comes full circle back to the whole mental health and all those sorts of
Keep
things, doesn't it?
calm,
Yeah,
carry on.
yeah, exactly. Stiff upper lip. Don't discuss your feelings, your emotions. And yeah, if there's something that you want to ask a question about, don't, because you might be embarrassed, or you might embarrass the other person, and that's that is doing a disservice to everyone. It isn't about teaching children to do things they're not ready for or they're not comfortable with. It's the exact opposite. This is what you do if you're not comfortable. This is what's okay. This is when it isn't okay, if you feel like it's not okay. And we are all different. So what's right for one person isn't for another. And when one person's ready, that doesn't mean the other person is. And all of that it needs so much more. That needs to be at the heart of sex education.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I agree. I think the most kind of towards sex it got when I was teaching it, or kind of when I was learning it myself, was that boys have wet dreams.
Mm-hmm.
That was
Yep.
literally it. And it was
Yep.
like, oh,
Yep.
but we forget as well, all these like sexual feelings and desires, they come from the brain, and there is science behind it. Just because it's not, a how to make a baby, it's it's almost like shied away from. And I think there's a big challenge on schools kind of plate in this sense, because with our country having so many schools based in faith, they have a duty to the church. The parents have chosen that kind of education for their child for one reason or another. And I remember when I worked in faith schools, you sign a contract to say you uphold the faith of the school, and the beliefs that come with that. And as senior leadership there, they have almost like a duty to the governors, the church, the parents, and obviously, moreover, all of that, the children. And it's almost like a balancing act, isn't it? Because I know a lot of Catholic schools won't teach about contraception, and they shy away from sexual pleasure, and it is very much biological. But I think what you said earlier is such a good idea about asking parents and stakeholders within the school community to actually do a survey and say, what is it you would like us to talk to your children about? Because although the government's left it quite vague, you could also see that as there's quite a bit of freedom there. And if you've got a school that where there's young people that identify as LGBTQ plus, or there's children there that have a high rate of safeguarding issues, how to tailor the content, which is ideal in a way. But it's finding what everybody feels is appropriate and right, so the children are kind of going away into further settings, not having to figure it out. And I mean, when I was kind of growing up, you kind of got your sex advice from movies and,
Yeah.
YouTube and Instagram and all these things weren't around then. You
Yeah.
really had to go out of your way to find anything. And it was obviously mostly wrong or inaccurate because it's
Yeah.
just on the
I mean,
grapevine, isn't it?
exactly. Peer-to-peer info, let's be honest, when you're kind of, 11, 12, info from your friends isn't necessarily going to be great going forward. Even older than that, it's going to be anecdotal and, as you say, very kind of third-hand information that perhaps wasn't accurate at the start anyway. And let's not forget that, as you say, films, TV programs, and popular music, a lot of that is highly
Oh
sexualized, and
gosh.
actually,
Yeah.
sadly, still often portraying women in a particular way. It might be male musical artists portraying women in that way, or it might be the women themselves portraying themselves in that way, but that highly sexualized image is all around us, and the lyrics to the songs
They,
are
they, they complement that whole stereotype so well,
indeed,
don't they?
yeah,
Like,
indeed. And if we don't
so bad.
address that,
Yeah.
we've got a few options. We can kind of try to shield children from that, which is pretty much impossible. We can let the children hear the songs, see the images, and not discuss it, and let them come to their own conclusions. Now that's not going to be great because they'll be maybe confused, or they will be thinking, oh yeah, to be popular with other people, you need to wear really skimpy clothes and dance in this particular way.
Like, you know what, Faye? Like, so I'm the youngest of 7.
Oh wow.
And we're mainly girls. And so in our house growing up, it was stick MTV on.
Yeah.
And like Jay-Z and 50 Cent and all those like rappers.
R. Kelly, who's just been done
well,
for...
I was gonna like talk to you about that. So we'll come back to that in a minute. But like, because I was just like, whoa, it's mad. But you'd see like the back of these videos, and obviously they're doing their thing. They're up front. They're like dancing, and then there's like kind of a main girl who's like grinding upon them, which I thought was quite strange. And then if you look in the background, there is not one man. They are just like a house of women, like
who all look a certain way. Obviously, they've got a certain body type, and are wearing very little, which makes me sound like a weird old prude. But it's
not
an image, isn't it? So we're sending a message, a clear message, which as adults we can process differently. We can see it for what it is. We know it's not real life. But as children growing up, that's a role model of sorts, or a way to be, or a way to present yourself, or a way to be popular, or so that third option, I was going to say, you've got the try and shield them from it, let them watch it and make up their own minds, or discuss it. Say, how does that make you feel? Or do you think that's a clear representation? Or have you noticed how? And talk about gender inequality and this kind of thing.
And it also, for men watching that, or young boys, it's like, oh, to have power and status, I should objectify women and have this big house and speak to women in this way, refer to women in these terms. And I mean, here is a perfect example. So for my 14th birthday, I'm not ashamed to say this. I mean, my parents didn't say, no, but they didn't exactly like it either. But I had a birthday party, and it was a rappers, rock stars, and hoes party.
Nice.
And like that was on the invite, and I thought I thought my birthday party was going to be like a Jay-Z video.
Yeah.
And I went as Missy Elliott.
Nice. Who is actually quite a powerful female role model.
She's awesome.
And really super cool. But your interpretation as a 14-year-old girl of that was, it was super cool. It was everybody was going to be able to wear absolutely what they wanted to wear. And as you say, it was going to emulate those videos you'd seen because that's what it meant to be cool growing up.
But the
We,
previous year, I had a Disney princess party. So very
oh,
odd.
wow.
Very, very
I love
odd.
that. And that doesn't that also show us though how quickly young people, and it could happen between the ages of 13 and 14, for others it will be younger, but how quickly children will grow up, and that's to do with everything they're surrounded by and their environment and the media. It's to do with their peers, but it's also just to do with them and how quickly they're growing up. And we need to acknowledge that. You can't just you know sweep it under the carpet. My daughter is she'll love watching something like Friends, which will have lots of references to relationships and sex and sleeping together and that kind of thing. But she will still be having a look online at the new Barbies that are coming out that sort of colour change in water, or Lego and Playmobil sets, because
It's
they
a
are.
transition, that, isn't
Yeah,
it, in
exactly.
itself? Yeah.
They are young people who are absolutely transitioning, as you say, from a child to an adult, and that process is a long one. It could start from age 9 in some children, and it can carry on through their early teenage years, where there's lots of understanding and processing what it means, and in different faiths and cultures and traditions all around the world. Obviously, for some cultures, there'll be a ceremony to celebrate somebody transitioning from childhood to adulthood, and that might be linked to their chronological age. It might be linked to the fact that they have started menstruating. It might be for a young boy who is, might be a ceremony because now you are a man. But actually, mentally, for all those young people in all those different cultures and backgrounds and places geographically, that process doesn't just happen. It isn't a switch.
No.
You, you've got to keep providing them with answers and information. It's an ongoing process. It's not one talk. We've told you that. Goodbye.
Yeah.
That's going to always sort of worry me that could still happen. It's not what Ofsted want to see. It's not what teachers want to see. It's not what parents want to see. So definitely schools have an obligation to try to work towards getting it right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, a lot of it comes from fear, and I think, the Twinkl Life scheme of work and the resources that, I know you've worked extensively on, Faye.
Mm.
It's all about giving people the tools, like it is of any kind of subject in that sense. I've done modern foreign languages stuff before, outside of Twinkl before I was here, and it's a lot of people kind of let it fall to the wayside for the same reason, in the sense that they don't really know how to approach it, and they see it as a specialist thing because maybe nurses used to do it. And yeah, I think going back to kind of the messages in the media about R. Kelly, I used to love his music as well.
I'm not quite. Obviously, you're a lot younger than I am, so I'm not really of a generation where I was. I wasn't a fan at any time, and that might be generation and genre. So not really my music either. But he was highly influential, incredibly popular, successful, and to hear now the way he was using that to manipulate men and women, mainly women, but some people were still legally children when he was using his influence, telling them he could get them into the music business, and then actually sexually abusing them and abusing his power. It's really alarming. But we do have a lot of information at the moment coming out, and reports and studies coming out around violence to women and girls.
Sorry, Faye, you cut out then.
Oh, sorry.
I had you from abusing his power.
Okay, yeah. So abusing his power, and that makes me think very much about the current studies and research and information we've got coming out around violence towards women and girls. And this is a topic that's being discussed heavily right now, which again feeds into PSHE and life skills and consent, autonomy, and sex education, relationships education. Um, it, it's got to be addressed. And yes, there are lots of charities and organisations working on it. But are we doing enough in schools to teach explicitly about it, or to put in place the building blocks that we need in place in young children? Whether that's gender stereotypes, again, they start really early on. You've got young children. There are some studies that show children as young as 5 or 6 think that boys are much smarter than girls. You've got very young children thinking that certain sports are for boys, or maybe coming out with a phrase like "boys don't cry," or
Oh my
look,
goodness, you know
girls
what?
aren't fast.
Yeah, you know what, Faye? Like, I recently did some like very interesting training, and it's just kind of jogged like a part of it for me when you were saying that, is that
Mm,
so they said exactly how early in children's lives do you
yeah,
think they start to develop these stereotypes? And then it started making me think how Charlie sees me and how he sees
yeah,
my partner Jonathan. And like, so Jonathan is he's a hobbyist wood turner, so he likes to make a lot of things. He's
wow,
very tactile,
yeah,
and so he'll always see his father as someone working with tools and someone who lets Charlie
mm,
play with a screwdriver, which I
yeah,
hate. I
hands on,
hate that.
practical, yeah,
Yeah, I hate that so much. But and he'll see me making dinner,
yep,
mopping up the juice he throws on the floor, and then I'm
yep,
like, well, so trying to explain to my son what I do and
mm,
what I kind of do for our family in terms of
mm, mm,
work and
mm,
work ethic and kind of what I've done to develop myself as a person is a really
yes,
hard message to get
yeah,
across. And they reckon it's in these very early stages where they start to think, oh, okay, well, that's what mummies do, or that's what
yes,
girls do, and this is what boys do. And you can see it, because even sometimes he says, even for inanimate objects, he'll say, where's the mummy and the daddy?
yes,
Because
yes,
he's not got to that point where he's understanding that families can look different. But
different,
it
yeah,
does worry me as a parent on a daily basis, the
mm.
reinforcement of
I
what I
think,
could be creating.
yeah, I think, and you've got that awareness, which means he'll be fine, he'll be great because you're on it. But obviously, not everyone's got the awareness, and it's okay. Absolute, of course. I think again, you've got people panicking and thinking that if we're open and forward thinking, we'll start teaching children that it's not okay to live in a family where mum cooks dinner and dad has an office job or works with tools. And actually, that's not what it's about. It's saying that this is one example of a family, and in our family, all the roles are valued, and everyone does the role that's right for them. And as you say, it needs looking at how that supports the family as a unit, and valuing everyone's role, but making sure that we say, but it won't be like that in all the other families, and that there are families with 2 mummies, 2 daddies, and that, yeah. And I guess it's addressing the stereotypes, but it's also looking a bit more deeply at what that stereotype means. So a stereotype of a policeman needs to be a man or a fireman, and a nurse is a lady. That's bad enough that that's a stereotype, because obviously we've got female firefighters and police officers, and we've got male nurses. But if on a deeper level we look at whether ones are linked to power and tools or even weapons, and what that means, and then the other one is around doing things for other people, which in itself is often undervalued. I think we need to really be thinking about how we can address that. And that's obviously that's not specifically linked to sex education, but it is linked to PSHE and growing up and careers and relationships and respecting what other people do in their work life, in their
Yeah, and
personal
their
life.
choices, right?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Looking at roles, rights, responsibilities, and respect. And it's also closely linked. And I think relationships and sex education at its core is about values. Of course, it's often some of the sex education part is about science, about biology, but really relationships and sex education is about values, and that is so important, and it is coming through the curriculum, and where it's done well, it's obvious that it's having a huge positive impact on those pupils, and it's that needs to be showcased, and we need to share best practice, and like we said, we need that training to build confidence, and yeah, get those core strands running through the curriculum, and not having one-off lessons of hilarity where we, for that one time only, we're going to use words that are embarrassing and rude.
Yeah.
It's just such a shame.
That's really great, Faye. I mean, before we finish, we kind of appeal to the wider social channels at Twinkl. And just, these are not necessarily what people believe. They're more like what people have heard from, I guess, other people they mix with, work with, maybe their parental friends. So I just want to make that clear in case anyone feels, that we've represented their comment in a strange way. So the first one I just want to put to you is, my child will learn about their body. Well, when my child will learn about their body, as a result, they'll become sexually active.
Yeah, so you and I have definitely touched on that, haven't we? And I think an awareness of your body and the different parts is actually learning about your body. We do teach children that some of our body parts are private, and that's why we cover them up when we go swimming, or the fact that we don't need to show those body parts, or certainly don't touch other people's body parts that are under their underwear. But if that's taught alongside, we also don't give someone a hug if they don't want to have a hug. We don't hold hands if they don't want to hold hands. We don't force them to play a game they don't want to play. It's on every level. So I think teaching children about their own body, and not to be ashamed of their body, but that their body is theirs, that's quite different from anything remotely linked to sexual activity. Certainly, yes, as they get older, they'll learn about how their body will change during puberty, and you will cover topics such as masturbation. But again, that's taught in context of, this is something that is something done in private. It's about you learning more about your body, what feels good, what doesn't feel good. And you touching your body is very, very different from someone else touching it, or from you touching someone else's. And yeah, it's making sure that it's right, the language is right, the context is right. I think body awareness and becoming sort of sexualized, or even learning about sexual activity, although they are linked, they're two very different things in terms of stages that children would learn about them. And as we said, children will process things as and when they're ready. We don't need to overload them with information, but we can answer their questions honestly and accurately in an age appropriate way.
That's a great answer, Faye. Thank you. The next one, again, more of a view that someone's heard.
Yeah.
Sex and relationship education should only be taught in schools.
Yeah, and I think, as we touched on earlier, there'll be lots of parents who would have that view. It's funny because you've got a spectrum. You've perhaps got some parents and carers who would rather, they see themselves as their child's primary educator, and they would rather teach about that and it not be taught in schools at all. Then right at the far end of the spectrum, as you've just said there, you might have people who believe that this is something that should exclusively be taught in schools and not handled as a parent. Again, it's not up to me to tell anyone what they should do. That's entirely subjective and up to parents themselves and carers themselves. Although we can think about best practice and what research shows, and research and studies do show that the best RSE and the best outcomes for children are when it's a really good, strong relationship between home and school, so that the dialogue is consistent, the information is consistent, the who to go to, those messages are consistent, and that it's not seen by the child as a topic that either the parents don't want to address or the school doesn't want to address, because that again is sending those subliminal messages of it's something that normal people don't do or don't talk about, but actually it is a normal part of adult life. So I think we have to think about the messages that we're sending beyond the explicit verbal messages we're giving.
Okay, that's it for today. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch via our social accounts. I hope you found this really interesting. We love chatting to Faye, and a special mention to Ingrid, who kindly provided us with an awesome soundtrack. Ingrid is a video content creator at Twinkl, a musical comedian outside of Twinkl, and lives and works in Australia. Take care.